this new effort that has become kind of the culmination in many ways of the vision of American forests over 145 years that we've been trying to bring America together to take action for our forests and all the things that they do for us. And this effort that I'll describe really kind of is a kind of a culmination, both in terms of what it represents and a particular kind of movement leadership that we think is needed now, but also the issues that we're leaning into, climate change, social equity, biodiversity, water supplies, these kind of really existential issues for us right now, and the way that it's all coming together in the work of this new platform, this 1T.org US chapter that we've launched. It's the perfect convergence point, really, for the things that we care about. And I think it's a really powerful leverage point for the things that you all have been working on as well. So starting from the top, the global, so what we have launched is the US chapter of a global platform called 1T.org. And so, I'll give you a little orientation to the global platform, and then this construct of the US chapter. So the vision behind 1T.org, and this was a vision that was created by the World Economic Forum, with the entity that's probably most widely known for their leadership of Davos, their annual meeting they hold in Davos, Switzerland every January, is a very important event. Getting influencers together, public and private sector influencers, to really kind of set the course for action on sustainability at a global level. And so, but WEF, just more broadly, if you don't know the World Economic Forum, is, they really have been incredible thought leaders in trying to name major global challenges and how different sectors of society can work together to solve them. And so in this space of natural climate solutions, they identified that there was a real gap, in particular around this idea of 1 trillion trees by 2030, which you might have seen, sort of pop up in different places. This vision that was catalyzed by certain research and leadership from different folks, mostly outside the United States at the international level, who really coalesced around 1 trillion trees is essentially a decadal benchmark of real progress on primarily when the idea was birthed for planting trees, the amount of trees that the science says we could plant to expand forests, restore forests, and ultimately maximize the benefit of forests on things like climate change. But the 1 trillion trees vision started to kind of morph and expand to beyond just tree planting to other types of forest conservation and restoration more broadly. And so there was just a lot swirling around this idea, exciting people, but yet not a lot of sort of coherence in what was happening. So World Economic Forum said, we don't need another group that's naming the 1 trillion trees goal and out there trying to pursue it on its own. What we need is a platform to get everyone together who's excited about this idea, make sure we're all defining what this is, what our goal is in the same way, and then make sure we're actually working together in the most strategic ways possible to get to something that's that big and that aspirational. We're real kind of a moonshot goal for forests. The biggest goal we've ever set for forests, over a decade, is going to require the biggest and most powerful movement that we've ever built. And so they said, we're going to launch a platform that is holistic and inclusive enough to bring all that activity together. Folks like Jane Goodall were part of the launch event in Davos in January, and then they announced this new platform to the world. And so as that was all coming together, we started to talk to folks at World Economic Forum about what could this look like in the United States, and really trying to understand how would this relate to the way we had been trying to organize folks here in the U.S. through the partnership with the U.S. Climate Alliance, through the Forest Climate Working Group, and through really just this vision for what we have been calling a Reforest America movement, particularly focused around scaling up reforestation. And so there were some kind of things happening here in the United States that really aligned with 1T.org. And so we started to talk to them about, well, like, what are you actually going to be doing, and how does that align with with what we're up to? And so this is basically the theory of change behind 1T.org. The first pillar of the theory of change is just around how can we, by bringing everyone together, actually inspire people to do more, to ratchet up their ambition. And we all know how that goes. If you're like training for a marathon off by yourself, you kind of run at one speed. You start training with other people and you just run a little faster, And so how can we kind of take that magic of the group and have that be an upward force on ambition? And also by raising the visibility of all this work, how does that actually feed ambition and also enable us to do more because there's more awareness and there's more interest? The middle pillar being, what are those barriers? Like, great, we want to do more, but what's holding us back? Is it funding? Are there issues around the science behind the work that we're trying to do? And how can we basically identify barriers for this work together and then and actually innovate our way around them together? And really use this 1T.org as a community of practice so that when we do figure out what to do, we can share it more efficiently. And then the third being that trying to ask the question, how do we make this inclusive, not just in terms of organizations, but even reaching all the way to individuals, with different kinds of essentially crowdsourcing ideas, crowdsourcing participation. So really big, lofty vision of what leadership that 1T.org was designed to provide. And we said, wow, that really aligns very, very well with what we've been seeing as what's needed here in the United States. It's kind of like we have this movement hiding in plain sight, but it needs to be brought together in a particular way. And so the kind of capstone on it, so we had already been talking to the World Economic Forum about potentially acting, we in this case being American Forests, had already been talking to World Economic Forum about being the facilitator for 1T.org in the United States and exploring different ways of doing that. But really the other piece that fell into place was, the federal government, in particular, the president was very present in Davos, was actually the keynote speaker. And so that triggered a lot of discussion about, hey, how could the US show up in this whole effort in a really, really big way? And so as that all sort of started to kind of roll forward from the launch event in Davos, we said, well, the United States actually has more interest. Federal government, state governments, cities, corporates, civil society organizations like the Girl Scouts, NGOs, like everyone was saying, hey, this sounds cool, I want in. And so we ended up deciding to make the United States the first ever chapter of 1T.org, that we would actually kind of have a platform within the platform that would give everyone who wants to engage in this work here in the United States a kind of a close to home place to dock in with the natural partners. We could customize the context for what's really going on here in the United States and really fine tune this so that the way the US shows up in this global effort really fits for what's happening here and how we can contribute the most. So then that led to having to, okay, that sounds like a good idea. Then we had kind of to figure out, so what does this chapter do exactly? What functions does it need to serve in order to actually help people in the United States do more at home, be better connected to this work globally, et cetera. And so, really, it really came down to the idea of we had to be super effective in how we bring people together here in the United States. And create the right structures, be inclusive in a way that we never have before. I mean, really redefine the forest community from just forestry organizations to anybody who wants to use trees and forests, whether you're a company that's trying to solve your carbon, hit your carbon goals with trees, and maybe a technology company, for example, or whether you're the Girl Scouts or a faith-based organization or any other kind of organization. You don't have to be a forestry organization to participate. We want anybody who's in on trees and forests to have a place here. So we had to kind of design that part right, and then also we really had to do some refinement to how we were just thinking about this trillion trees goal, which I'll speak about in a moment. And so ultimately this was the this is kind of how we really turned that general purpose into structure, or you know, sort of a set of functions, if you will. That we built a digital platform that we're using to take pledges, and so we're asking anybody from a local government or a Girl Scout troop up to USDA can make a pledge to this U.S. chapter of what it is going to do over some portion of the next 10 years to achieve this goal of conserving, restoring, and growing 1 trillion trees by 2030. And so when we said, how do we kind of create that ratcheting mechanism for increasing ambition, and the pledge was really the way that we decided that we wanted to do that. And I'll get into that more. That we wanted to not just say, hey, like, come to the website, make a pledge, and then go back to what you were doing. We wanted to really try to make the relationship much more substantive, the value add much more substantive. So that the U.S. chapter putting itself on the spot to become a really strong technical service, technical assistance provider, generating, for example, a carbon quantification tool that we created and put on our website. We created with the U.S. Forest Service and put on our website. Other kinds of technical tools and assistance that we wanted to be a real, a one-stop shop for those kinds of things. That we didn't just want to say, make a pledge and figure it out. We wanted to have pledges, support with technical assistance, and then also actually track progress. Because a lot of times with these pledging mechanisms, nobody actually figures out whether they did it or not. And we said, well, that's not the goal. So we actually have 2 scoreboards. We have one scoreboard, which is, what did you say you were going to do? Interesting. And then we have another scoreboard, which is, what have we actually accomplished? And that's based on annual reports that anyone making a pledge has to file with us, and that we will be verifying to understand. For example, you said you're going to plant 1 million trees over the next decade. That's 100,000 a year. We'll get a report on exactly how many trees you planted, and has to take mortality into account and other things. So we're talking real numbers here. And so we will be tracking what is the United States contributing towards this 1 trillion tree goal in actual outputs and not just ambition. And then I think that, one of the things I'm most excited about, maybe it's even the thing personally I'm the most excited about in this whole effort, is that we've said all along, it can't just be more, but it also has to be better. That, for example, doing reforestation in a changing climate, as we're seeing in California right now, must account for the reality that climate change is already here. It's happening faster than we expected, and it's putting a lot of stress on forests. It looks different in the Northeast, for example, than it does in the West, but every part of the country, we can now see these unmistakable climate signals in forest health and resilience. And so when we're doing reforestation, or we're doing conservation projects, or other types of things that fit into our 1 trillion trees vision here, we have to incorporate cutting edge climate science in how forestry is done, or we're not going to be successful. And so using this chapter as a way to bring people together, to really crowdsource what we know, and then identify what we don't, and work together to fill those gaps, but then ultimately use this as a network for propagating the best approaches with a reach that we've never seen before. If we could have churches and civil society organizations like that, using the best forestry techniques, the same ones that we use at American Forest, that's a home run for getting real impact in the world. And it's a big ambition, but that's actually the way that we're thinking about it. And then the last piece is just the way that we promote this effort, because I think we all understand today just the power of influencers, just the power of awareness, right, is just incredibly important in generating then support, resources to actually do more. So I'm going to give you a little bit of the end of the story at the beginning, but I was sharing this with folks earlier, that we had our launch of this effort on August 27th, and we generated 488 media hits around the world that reached 178 million people. And that was just a one-day push, just kind of like first day out of the gate. And you can imagine when you get that level of reach, well, first of all, it doesn't stop that day. That just echoes and ripples, through the communication cycles, and still is weeks later. It's absolutely just day after day after day, new stories, continued social media interest, and those kinds of things. And what's happening? Well, because of all that talking about it, new players are coming on board. are actually coming to us. We don't have to find them. They're coming to us and saying, I heard about this. This is totally what we're in for. Let us help. We want to make a pledge or, be part of this in different ways. So we really see the communications as one of the important value adds here. And so ultimately the US chapter is responsible for making that happen. The structure that we've created for this US chapter is we formed a US stakeholder council. So, okay, if we're going to build the most inclusive forest movement that we've ever seen in this country, we need to have a stakeholder group that mirrors that same diversity. And I'll show you that group in a few moments. But it's 21 really prominent and respected and diverse experts who are coming at this from a lot of different angles. This US chapter of OneT.org is operated day to day by a secretariat, which is essentially made up of staff from American Forests and from the World Economic Forum. Essentially, pooled a group of staff. It's probably about 15 to 20 people who are touching this project in one way or another on a day in, day out basis. So we've got some, some heft behind this in terms of when people show up and say, I want to participate, somebody's going to get right back to them. We have that engagement. We have the capacity to run this community of practice. Yesterday, we had 35 people from different organizations, some of the biggest companies in the world, USDA, just superpower players on the phone for an hour talking about carbon finance and starting up our work together on carbon finance. And, we have the capacity to facilitate those kind of conversations among the folks who are at the table through this secretariat. And then again, just, the way we're defining the whole foundation for this is this incredibly inclusive community, the way we're defining our new community of interest. So this is a stakeholder council, and you'll see it really kind of breaks down into 4 key groups: governmental representatives. So we've got a couple of federal agencies represented, National Association of State Foresters. We've been talking to a number of governors. We're really hopeful we're going to get a governor. It's been a little harder than we expected. Actually invited the United States Climate Alliance, and that wasn't just a good fit because of the diversity of the way they're structured, really. But we're in late stage conversations with some governors to potentially join the National Association of State Foresters and other state level representation that we have here on the council, tribal representation, and then a really good representation from different corporate leaders, NGO leaders, and then civil society as well. And super important, we said all along, this is apolitical, nonpartisan, pick your favorite word, bipartisan, it's all the above. But we said from the beginning, this is 100%, everyone has to be welcome. And although this group is talking about policy and becoming informed on policy, it is importantly not an advocacy entity, because there are some of the groups around the table that, even by their own legal charters, can't get involved in advocacy. And so this is a place where many of these partners will actually go off and be very involved in policy advocacy, but OneT.org won't take policy positions. And so that'll help us keep this a safe space so that, everyone feels welcome and everyone can participate. So just I mentioned earlier that we spent some time refining what counts toward 1 trillion trees. And I think this is particularly important for the states that you all represent, because when the idea of this goal of 1 trillion trees by 2030 came out of the gate, it was mostly associated with the idea of planting 1 trillion trees by 2030. And our organization's been big on tree planting for 145 years. So we totally get that and think it's really important. But we also understand that conserving the forest that we have is also really, really important. It's actually the foundation for everything that we're trying to accomplish with forests, is keep your forests as forests. And for me, as the former director of the Eastern Forest Partnership and a lifelong resident of the Eastern, Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states, I always say, the great news about our forests is they're not really burning down. They don't really need to be restored in the same way as Western forests, but it's actually kind of keeping a good thing going in the East. We have our forest health challenges and so forth, but really some of our greatest challenges are just around forest conservation. It's such a key thing that we need to do in this region. And so we were made sure to say, let's think about this as a net gain of 1 trillion trees by 2030. So what are the trees that we might otherwise have lost that we didn't? And that's our conservation pillar. And then what are the trees that we're adding through reforestation or variants of that, which are essentially growing more trees than would have grown otherwise. And so we sort of defined sort of eligible practices, if you will, in that way, in terms of what we will actually count. And literally we have a scoreboard, which you'll see in a minute. We're actually keeping track. How many more trees do we get? And we came up with a methodology working with the Forest Service to convert, and I should note, differentiated by region. When you do a conservation project, we're going to conserve this many acres in this part of the country. We can actually translate that into the number of trees protected, and it's not just every tree that was on that acre, but we actually have factors for the amount of forest that is disturbed on average per acre in different parts of the country, tree types, and we can actually translate that into quite a rigorous amount of trees that are essentially protected when you conserve an acre in different parts of the country. So we can really kind of keep score on conserving forests and restoring and growing forests in a way that adds up and makes sense. But then I think critically important is that we said, but that's good, that's holistic. But then there's this whole other universe of things that we all need to be successful. We need carbon finance that starts as dollars and turns into trees later. We need technical assistance. We need workforce development. We need technological tools, mapping and data and those kinds of things. And so we came up with this idea of a category of supporting actions. Forest certification be another great example. Of actions that we're not going to try to translate them into trees because that's a bit of a messy process, but we know they're ultimately going to help us achieve more, put more trees on the board in those other categories. And we were told folks, and we've stayed to this, that we're not going to treat those as kind of like, that's the afterthought category. When we're lifting up the contributions and the pledges in that third category. And just to name one, for example, Bank of America pledged $300 billion in climate finance, not all of which I should say is going to go into trees. There's a significant portion of that that's clean energy and electrifying vehicles and so forth. But some number of billions of dollars out of that 300 billion will translate into carbon finance, for these kinds of projects. And then other, Amazon and Microsoft and others that came to the table have some really substantial supporting actions, billions of dollars worth of supporting actions that will, in some cases, translate into trees down the line, and in other cases will be really foundational to how we're able to do good work in these other areas. Just a few more things. So this is the digital platform that we created for this effort. As you can imagine, this is the front door. This is the clubhouse. This is the showroom. This is us. In the way of the modern world. You're a website and a set of social media accounts. It's kind of like that's how you communicate with the world most efficiently. And so we put a lot of energy into this website. It's actually only going to get better. This is the version 1.0. And so as you can see, there's a scoreboard right when you arrive, how we're doing on trees. Actually, the About Us tab is, in this case, quite substantive, has a lot of information, an in-depth Q&A, detailed information about the stakeholder council with a video from each council member. I could go on and on, but there's a lot of really actually meaty information that I would commend to your attention if you want to dig into this in more detail later. The View Pledges page. So, one of the things that we're trying to do is really promote these pledges out into the world. And so the View Pledges page, starts with a little bit of information about each pledge, and you click and really get a very in-depth understanding of what each entity has pledged. We built the carbon estimator tool that I mentioned, which gives you consistent calculations of what the carbon benefits will be from each pledge. And then the Make a Pledge button is essentially any entity can make a pledge. And so this, we built a pledge template that's kind of like a TurboTax form. You come in, you make a very simple little account, and then it's just page after page after page of kind of pulling out of you, what are you going to do? Where are you going to do this work? We have some key things in there about committing to certain standards of forestry, good practices around community engagement and those kinds of things, so that it's not just anything, but we're sort of saying there's a certain standard of work that we're that we're aiming toward here, and we're asking folks to commit to. And then, you kind of closes out with the annual agreeing to, you have to actually agree, check the box, agree to the annual reporting requirement. So by the time that someone's completed the form, we have a full picture of what they're doing. We can represent it confidently to the world. And we know that they're in for the long-term relationship and all the requirements that go that go with that. And then we actually take, the forms are submitted, we actually take them and review each one. We look for duplication or double counting potentially across any of the pledges and those kinds of things. And so it doesn't just kind of press a button and you're live, but it actually goes into the Secretariat, gets reviewed, and then eventually gets posted on the platform. And just maybe as one example of the commitment to being really innovative and reaching deep in terms of trying to bring folks on board. There's a technology called Uplink that was created by our partners at the World Economic Forum, working with Deloitte and LinkedIn. And it's essentially a crowdsourcing tool. And in this case, one of the things that we're crowdsourcing are ideas. So we actually just wrapped up the semifinal round of a Trillion Trees challenge competition, where we named 5 really substantive barriers that everyone's seeing in the Trillion Trees field. And we're like, if you're the Goodwill Hunting of a Trillion Trees, come on in, give us your ideas. Ecopreneurs, everybody can come on board here and give us your ideas. And so it's really fun. I got to be a judge, and I'm a judge in this competition. It's really fun. And so we've just got all these different folks from all walks of life and types of organizations that are coming forward and putting forward potential innovations. And so that's the spirit of this thing. We have technology to make that spirit into reality. And this is just, I think, exemplary of the, the whole, feel of this effort. And so just a few vital signs. I do have to give a little shout out to Governor Raimondo, who just last week, American Forest gave our first inaugural Tree Equity Champion Award for her leadership on urban forestry in the state of Rhode Island. Incredible work that Rhode Island is doing to advance tree equity for climate and health in every community in the state. So perfect example is, we've said, look, we've had a Trillion Trees movement hiding in plain sight in the United States. It's federal agent government, it's state government, it's local government, tribes, it's just all in on this. And so we feel like our job is, how do we bring that together, how we knit that together, and have some of the effects that I was describing earlier. I can't stress enough. I think if I were thinking about this, listening to this as a state legislator, I think from my perspective, one of the key things we're all trying to figure out is how to get more leverage for the public sector dollars from the private sector. We've got that here. Travelers are an amazing partner of American Forests, just incredible partner. Came in with a pledge. Salesforce, Microsoft, Amazon. A number of different technology leaders. Bank of America, MasterCard, a number of other leaders in the finance space. Really tremendous. Diversity of corporates, and a whole nother wave, Cliff Bar, Pepsi, so other folks in the food and beverage space, but a whole nother wave that's folks that couldn't quite get it to finished before launch, or for whatever reason need a little more time. But we've got REI and a bunch of other really neat companies that are just about to join in as well. So we just expect this to keep rolling and rolling and rolling. These folks are coming in with commitments, but in a lot of cases, they're coming with commitments. In most cases, they're coming with commitments and some of the partners in place. So there's some sort of, some of the decisions have been made. But in almost every instance, these are corporates that are coming to table with goals, but not yet having decided where and how they're going to advance them. And so that opens up some real opportunities. This is actually an opportunity for the corporate leaders around the table to see who's doing what. Who do they want to partner with? Wow, I didn't realize the state of Connecticut's doing that thing, or whatever. Didn't realize that Rhode Island was a leader on tree equity. Tell me more about that. So I think we really view this from a state perspective as it's a real opportunity for exposure, for collaboration, and for forming partnerships that could be really beneficial to the kinds, bring real meaningful private sector leverage to the kinds of things that your states are trying to accomplish. But also, I think really importantly, NGOs and civil society organizations are also stepping up in huge ways and new ways, and bringing not just people to the table, but bringing funding that they've, I can even say we've raised and are ready to want to leverage with public dollars, want to do work in partnership with government. And so similarly, I mean, it's sort of a chance for these other private sector partners to sort of see who's doing what in terms of that public-private connection and find new collaboration as well. So I hope that this would feel to your states as a leverage opportunity. Just finally, then a little summary of kind of the ground that we've covered. So we launched the Stakeholder Council before we actually took the chapter public, so we could really come out of the gate feeling connected and having our whole structure really up and running. And so that was just an incredible kickoff meeting. I think just people looking across at each other and feeling like something special was happening. Then we had a couple months where we were soliciting this first round of pledges. But August 27th was that launch that I referenced earlier. So really just a few weeks ago, that had, as I mentioned, it's just really incredible media reception, but also equally strong, social media reception, and maybe most importantly for sure, that has translated into more progress forward, new partners, new ambition. The folks who did come in on this thing saying, I made a good decision here. Like, this is actually working. I'm feeling the surge coming out of this. So that was really cool. And so now we're really just, we're all in on the community of practice. Yesterday was actually the first meeting of our community of practice, this carbon finance working group that we put together. Of course, that's where some of the biggest corporate dollars are going to then translate into. So where are those going to go? What types of projects and where on the ground are we ready to deliver those projects and so forth. So this carbon finance piece we see as kind of like a junction box between some of the players around the table, and everyone agrees it doesn't quite work the way that we want it to right now. There's some barriers, some gaps, some issues. So we're really excited to have us now kind of working together from the the producer side, the buyer side, and in some cases the governmental side, which can play in different ways in that mix. Just kind of all collaborating around how to get carbon finance right. But we'll soon be launching, the working groups on climate-informed forestry and other things that are just essential to be collaborating on to get this right. And so lastly, back to this. So where does the rubber meet the road? What does this mean for me? I mean, states are a level that of government that we're just incredibly eager to have involved here, and that's we are still seeking that stakeholder council. A state that wants to be on the stakeholder council, and we'll see if how these conversations that we have ongoing. But if a state that where you think there might be interest, I would love to follow up with folks on any connections or introductions or thoughts you might have in that regard. But we'll keep working on that. Certainly, we are really hopeful that we'll have some strong state pledges. We came out of the gate, interestingly enough, with really great city pledges. And a number of states that we were in discussion with, but that didn't quite get to the finish line. We expected to come in with a huge federal, tens of billions, maybe federal pledge in terms of tens of billions of trees. And the federal government, I think, is really smartly taking its time and saying, hey, this is complicated. Federal agencies, federal lands, federal programs. There's so many things to think through. Instead of just kind of throwing a number out there that doesn't feel rigorous and something that they can really act on, they're taking their time now and just continuing to work through a number of questions. But we'll eventually have a federal pledge for sure. I expect to have many more local government and tribal government pledges, and would really love any thoughts you all have on how we might identify some states within your network that might want to come in and pledge the things that they're doing. And then, once folks are in the door, this community practice, as I said, it's up and running, and we're going to be creating a lot of opportunities for folks to pull into it. The public policy side, and of course, your legislators and so have a particular angle on that. But just so that we are definitely, well, again, we're not, in the name of OneT.org, we're not doing push advocacy letters or policy platforms or things of that nature. To give you an example of how it is playing out, there's a fantastic bipartisan, bicameral and bipartisan piece of legislation, to one of many, that we've worked on in this trillion trees space in the last 6-8 months here. This one in particular is called the Replant Act, which would fix an outdated capped federal trust fund, and by uncapping it, free up almost $100 million a year for replanting national forest land in the US. There's a huge backlog of reforesting national forests because of this outdated cap in this one trust fund. And so you would think that would be easy to fix. It's actually been extremely hard to do, but we're now right on the verge of getting that done. And so a bunch of the super influential corporate partners around the table are writing a support letter. They're saying, hey, this is great. I mean, look at the support. We've got, across the board, everyone thinks this is a good idea. We're going to put our shoulder to the wheel and say that as companies that are putting our own money where our mouth is in terms of supporting this kind of work, we're supportive of policies that will help too. So I think there are lots of ways in which we hope this will have a positive impact on policy making. And then lastly, again, I've talked a lot about talking, but we just think that the communications aspect of this, it really can cut through in powerful ways, but it only works if we all amplify. And so we are ultimately asking anyone who plugs in to really help. And we've seen amazing things like, every embassy, putting out releases on it, and these corporate entities that have millions and millions of Twitter followers, using their outlets. And so states could be incredibly powerful in powering the communications reach of this overall effort. So the very last thing I'll say is the website, I should have mentioned this earlier, it's easy to remember, it's us.1t.org. You might have already Googled it and found it while we were talking here, but I was talking. But us.1t.org, and that is definitely a great starting point in terms of just trying to assimilate more detail on this whole effort. So I'll stop there, and I'd love if there are any questions or thoughts or feedback, and thoughts about how we might collaborate on this.
I was muted, sorry. Thank you so much, Jad. This is super exciting, and congratulations to you. I mean, it's so impressive to see the outpouring of support that you've had in such a short period of time.
Fascinating.
Thank you so much. That's very kind of you to say. It's been a real labor of love. It's I can't, as I said earlier, this kind of servant leadership, this kind of inclusive way of doing things, it just feels really good, and it's just so in alignment with our organizational vision and identity, and it resonates for me personally. So it's been an incredibly exciting thing to be a part of, for sure.
Now, just a quick question for you, just a clarifying question. The 855 million or so trees that have been pledged so far, in what time frame were they pledged?
It's good. It's a good question. In total, over the next decade. So thanks for asking that question, because I realize actually there are two things that I either didn't mention or didn't lean on enough. Number one is that this is a trillion trees conserved, restored, and grown by 2030. So we're asking people to pledge, remember the 3 categories of activities that are eligible for pledging that I went through. We're asking people to tell us what are these things are you going to do, and over what period of time, how much, and over what period of time. And so some of the pledges are set up to, end in 2022 or 25 or whatever. And so we would expect that same entity might actually come back in and do a second pledge, before we reach the end of that 10 years. But some folks came in and they did a 10-year pledge that perfectly matched the time window. The other thing that I want to say, and I think this is really important for you all as you think about this, is that we importantly we didn't want to penalize folks who had been early actors. And so take MasterCard, for example. They just announced the Priceless Planet campaign with some great partners like 3 months ago, 6 months ago. A multi-year campaign, it's a 5-year campaign that they just announced. And we didn't want to say, oh, well, that's too bad. You're just a little too soon. And so basically what we said to folks is, if you have an existing platform like that, your city has a million tree campaign that you just started, you can bring that in. You can actually pledge your campaign. Now, we're only going to count in our scoreboards what you're going to do next. So we're not going to look backwards and say, you already did, but you don't have to if you're already doing the right thing, essentially, you don't have to reinvent it just to participate. We actually want to start by making sure, hey, let's build from the folks who are already in here, but we'll only track progress going forward. And so that's been important, I think, for folks who feel like, hey, do I have to start all over again? And the answer is definitely no. But at the same time, the two things we are hoping. One is when folks come in with an existing effort that they have going, we do hope that coming on board here might actually get them to stretch a little more. Hey, we were doing a million tree campaign, now we're going to go for 2, which is exactly what's happened with a number of partners. And also, of course, we are very excited about targeting brand new pledges. Folks who've maybe been doing this work, but they've never kind of committed to a long-term goal or anything that would be like a pledge. And we have a bunch of those as well.
And just one more question for you, and then I'll open it up to the others. So if there's a municipality that would like to make a pledge, but doesn't have the technical expertise, has never gotten involved in this realm before, and you talked about those forms that they need to fill out to, show what they're going to do. So how do they proceed then?
Yeah, that's the beauty of this. That's what that secretariat that I mentioned, our staff, are exactly designed to do. They will walk anyone through the process. And in fact, we are set up to assume that a significant portion of the folks making a pledge don't have much background in this at all. I mean, we're getting power users for sure, but we want, the city council, in some particular place to make a pledge. We want, we want those smaller entities to do it as well. And so that's partly why we made sure that we had the human capacity on our side to help people through the process. Folks can, contact me and I can spin it to the appropriate person. But if you go to the website and if you click make a pledge, it has contact all the way through. It's like, need help, contact us here, and like somebody will get right back to you. So it's very much set up for not like online live help, but literally somebody will call you back and set up a meeting and walk you through it.
Okay, great.
Yeah, congratulations. This is fabulous.
Thank you.
What's the format in which a state would make a pledge? Would it be something that has to be officially come from the governor or DNR secretary? What type of commitment?
Yeah, that would be. I think that would be the way that we've imagined it. I mean, I don't want to kind of name out particular states and that are kind of in the process, but the conversations that we're involved in have mostly been either originated with DNR leaders that we were working with in a particular state through the U.S. Climate Alliance, for example, and so who have been working actually intensively on setting these kinds of goals, and so really actually answering this sort of pledge question before it was asked, if you will. And so our kind of working assumption, or not working assumption, the way we've seen that work, we've generally been about half the cases probably started with engaging with someone at DNR, and then they've eventually run it up to that governor's office level for some kind of approval. There have been a few instances where, for whatever reason, we've kind of started with a contact in a governor's office, and then it's been delegated down to someone in an agency to figure out, hey, what would be realistic here? How will we do this? But basically, that was a very long-winded way of saying it's really been partnership between the agencies that would ultimately be the implementers and could come up with the right numbers. The approval level somewhere in a governor's office is generally been the structure that we've seen.
Okay.
And I realize I should say, because this is, I think, very significant, that if a state were to pledge, for example, this is not a legally binding obligation. So if the state says, hey, we want to plant, 20 million trees over the next 5 years, or we want to conserve, maybe coming up with, example that's most relevant to the most states in this part of the region, in the country, we want to conserve X number of acres of at-risk forest land in our state, or something of like that nature. A state could pledge an ambition that was pledged by a particular administration at a particular point in time. It's based maybe on certain assumptions about what funding might be available in the future, and we understand that. And so that's why the pledge is, it's not legally binding. If for whatever reason those conditions change, we'll understand that. But I think that the tracking process does give us a chance to see, well, how did that actually play out? And so we hope that we know that still is a slightly complicated thing for governments to make those kinds of commitments. But we were excited that so many city governments anyway were able to get over some of those hurdles, and we do hope that will work for states as well.
Great.
Yeah, question. Rona, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. That was a great presentation. It answered a lot of questions that I had at the outset about it. I still have a number of questions, but instead of the nature-based, in terms of the nature-based solutions that you're talking about, whether it's the World Economic Forum or with American Forests, the commitment level in terms of guaranteeing that the commitment comes through, there's no, like when you're dealing with companies, say Amazon wants to ensure that they have carbon financing situation set up where they're going to be able to guarantee that they've sequestered so much carbon with a donation that comes in for a pledge for X amount of trees, for so many trees they're going to be planting. How is all of that verified?
Yeah, great question. And by the way, I should note if at any point any of you go into the View Pledges page, you'll notice that there are some companies, and actually Amazon's a good example, that have expressed their commitment at this juncture in dollars instead of trees, because they haven't yet, decided what projects and where and so forth to be able to kind of make that translation. And there are some other pledges that are actually at this point denominated in carbon goals, essentially denominated in a carbon goal instead of just a tree goal. And so I think that is, so actually there are a couple implications. That one is it means that our tree number is actually still, again, well low of how those things will translate into additional trees that have already been pledged. But it's also in recognition of the fact that for a company, any company that, that's saying, I want to do something with trees, I have a certain amount of money to spend on this, or a really rigorous carbon goal that I need to hit on this. The way I'm going to need to do that is probably through something that is like either an offset project or close to it. And so, they will be, each entity that makes a pledge is essentially responsible for implementing it. And so 1T.org is kind of the tent that we're bringing all this together under, but 1T.org isn't going to do it. Amazon's going to do it. They're going to do it in partnership with, in many cases, nonprofit organizations. The Nature Conservancy is an example of a great partner of Amazon's, and you'll see in their pledge, they'll specify out, here's what we're going to do, here's how much money we're committing to do it. Here, Nature Conservancy, American Forest Foundation, some of their other partners are named, and then they'll sort of say, this is what we know so far about how we're going to turn those dollars into, to your point, rigorous carbon reductions that we can confidently credit against our carbon goals. And then here's what's kind of to be determined how we're going to turn those dollars into the, into the carbon outcomes that we want. But each entity that makes a pledge is able to and find whatever kind of carbon crediting system or project structure fits, its goals on something like that. Our job is to essentially keep track of, what did folks do versus what they said they were going to do. So if Amazon said they're going to invest $100 million in carbon finance, we're going to track that, and we will also track how many trees that turn into as well. But something like another level of detail, like a carbon reporting thing, is sort of left in their basket, if that makes sense.
Well, I'd like to suggest that, from the state's perspective, when I look at it, say from Massachusetts, we're looking at getting to net zero by 2050.
Mm-hmm.
We already have 80% by 2050, but we're in the process of changing the legislative requirement. So it's not a goal. It's not
Right.
maybe we can do it. It's going to be a legally binding target.
Yeah.
Whereas somebody could sue us, as was done a few years ago under the 80%, and the Supreme Court said, state of Massachusetts, you must continue on the track and meet this requirement that you put into statute. And so in order for us to do that, we need to be investing in, choices that we're going to be making in terms of nature-based solutions. We're going to need to figure out a way in which those nature-based solution investments are going to get us where we need to be in terms of if we put 15% aside for nature-based solutions out of the net zero calculation, then we need to, factor that in. And maybe there's a certificate or something that says, where our investment has gone, that this is actually happening. There needs to be verification.
Yeah.
I would think, right now, even though U.S. is on the verge of coming out of Paris, hopefully that will change. But if we're going to do this as a world community, we need to do it more than just talking about it. We actually have to have verification that these things are happening. And I think the plan that American Forests has, based upon what you just went over, is exciting. I'm just wondering, and it's a great way to have a lot of achievements and a lot of organizations that are small organizations that can participate in a way where you have a lot of small organizations that participate. You do big things, utilizing the pledge. But if you can't document it in terms of carbon emission reductions, then from a global warming perspective, from a climate change perspective, it becomes a bit frustrating. And so is there a way that maybe CSG can work with, or with some other organizations that may be doing this? I don't know, Rona, we were talking earlier today about an organization that does verification about carbon reductions. But maybe there's a way to do that. You have a carbon estimator tool, I guess, as part of the project. Is that based on
every single pledge has to tell us how much carbon that they're going to sequester by
That's great.
By using this tool, and we have a reporting. This is a pledge duty tool. We are working on a reporting level tool right now with a U.S. Forest Service, can be done this month. So we will be able to tell you when people report to us, for example, how many trees they planted and where. We'll be tell you exactly how much carbon they sequestered over a different time frame. I want to distinguish between crediting and, certifying outcomes. We're not turning this into a carbon credit market or standard or that type of thing. So we're not putting that on it. We're not trying to trade tradable credits, out of the things that are reported to us, because that would just add layers of, bureaucracy to what we're trying to do here. And to your point earlier, which I think you made some really critical points there, but also we want to make sure that this is accessible to those, lower power users as well, that they don't have as much resource here, that don't have a net zero target for their organization, that, it's a Girl Scout troop that wants to plant trees to help act on climate change. They want it to be real. They want to accomplish something, but aren't looking for a carbon credit to be associated with that. And so we tried to really hit that balance of being real and rigorous, but also not adding additional layers of layers of bureaucracy that would be a barrier to others. And so the fact that annual reports are required, so we'll know exactly what people really did. We'll be able to tell you the real carbon impacts of what they did. I think we will have those real numbers. But just, whether for an Amazon or some of those kinds of players, they're not only going to want to have the right number, but they're going to want to have it go through a traditional, most likely something more like a traditional carbon crediting mechanism, that you would think of, that you would normally think about, like on the voluntary market, for example. So that was sort of the distinction that I was trying to draw.
Yeah, Jay, that's what I was, I guess, getting to, is that it's almost a two-tiered system. The smaller players, I understand what you're saying, but I would think an Amazon, depending upon what happens as we go forward with, with climate, a lot's going to depend upon what happens in the next election in the U.S. And what happens in terms of U.S. leadership with Paris and what's happening with the World Economic Forum and other organizations that want to make this a priority. At some point in time, to guarantee the outcomes that everybody needs to meet in terms of targets, there needs to be a verification to see if those targets have actually been met. And we're doing that at the state level now for those states that actually do have targets. We're measuring them every year to find out. Obviously it's a couple of years lag time in terms of the real, getting a hold of the real numbers, but that's the only way you really know if we're tracking things to get the outcome we want to get to. So I'm just, thinking out loud here as to where there might be an opportunity for the right type of marriage here with CSG and getting involved with this program where we could actually have our member states, obviously with the trees that helps everyone, and it certainly helps with the goal that you have here. I think it's fantastic that this is going on. From a strictly a carbon reduction perspective, I'm looking at it as to how can I, get the carbon market started as well. And I know that might not be the first tier scenario here for priority, based upon the way you have it structured. But is there an opportunity for, like in Connecticut, they have the Connecticut Green Bank, right? And there are other financing mechanisms that people are looking at with a carbon market. I'm glad you folks are talking about that. Are there ways that could be a potential, in particular, where you have a lot of companies that if they're going to be investing and pledging so much for trees, they're going to need an independent certificate to verify that
No question about it.
they're actually doing what they're telling the general public they're doing, right? They're going to have a third-party verifier.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And you know, and so just, you know, I think we're very much on the same page. And just to be clear, the reason why we have this why we have a substantial staff in our secretary for 1T.org is so that for the outcomes that we are verifying at our level, the way in which we're doing it, you know, we can give that attention to each annual report and make sure that what we're saying happened actually happened. You know, the way that carbon offset markets do it, maybe some of those additional layers that they're going to bring to the table, you know, I think it's all complementary. In fact, the way we've imagined this is that folks making reports to us are going to use the same data sources that they would be feeding into, you know, a carbon offset project that might run through VCS or Vera or Gold Standard or one of those kinds of markets CAR. And so this carbon working group, just to be really specific about it, you know, this carbon working group that we're on, this group that we met yesterday of all these different folks around the table in this group, we're talking about, okay, how does the carbon credit generation that different partners around the table want and need to create align with this effort? How do we dovetail them in the right way? Because they're not really, we don't see them as alternatives. They're just sort of, they're sort of layered, if you will, together. And so I think that especially those larger users you're talking about, all of them are going to do this work. They're going to report it to us in one way. We're going to verify it to one level of detail. They're going to simultaneously be feeding that exact same information to a carbon offset market of a registry of one kind or another. And they're going to have those same activities, you know, also verified and registered as voluntary offsets, or maybe, you know, compliance offsets in some cases, you know, and integrating them into their you know, internal carbon accounting on the basis of those credits. So I think actually these things are very much together and in alignment. And I think that, you know, the ideal here is what we're doing here is we're setting a floor that's actually, you know, a little below where, you know, some of these, I don't even want to name companies, but where, you know, some of these leading companies in carbon are here, you know, city councils and youth groups and others are here. We're setting a standard that's kind of pulling the, you know, the less sophisticated users up to a higher level. We're only asking the higher power users to give us, you know, kind of just enough information out of what they're doing, so we don't try to turn this into a carbon market of its own. But we are expecting and supportive of all those larger users that are going to move into carbon markets to do it. And so all the discussion we were having yesterday is about how does this community influence and strengthen what's happening in carbon markets so that they work better, they're more flexible, so that more and more entities do go to that extra step. That extra step isn't as expensive and onerous as it is now. The supply demand pinch points that we're seeing already in a frightening level don't have people walking away and say, well, I can't buy forest offsets. There aren't enough of them, so I'm going to go do something else. You know, I think there are a lot of issues that we need to address in order for the carbon, particularly the voluntary carbon offset markets, to work in the way they need to for all the companies that might want to play there to do so. And so I think this community can be really helpful in strengthening those carbon markets and those offset programs at the same time that we're working together in this context too.
Would there be an opportunity, and this is, you know, just think about it for at least 30 seconds when I say this, so you can have your reaction. But would there be an opportunity with the organization to look at a proposal of a not a voluntary market, but a mandatory market for member states or state entities that would want to participate with some of the pledges. Like if we were to put together a proposal to have it taken, to take a look at something like that, where we have, say, in the Northeast, you have a number of states that have the same overriding goals. I would say very soon you'll have, most of the states in the Northeast that will be very similar as to where they want to be. There'll be a different percentages in terms of the natural solutions, nature solutions. But whether a state wants to do 10% or 15% or 20% or whatever it is, nature solutions, then somehow they're going to want to make sure that those investments, or corporations that are investing so that they can make those investments, are going to be verified, whether it's through Vera or some verification source, those numbers for the state. Is that something we might be able to direct both state and corporate investors from our states to work with you in some type of pilot to try to move forward, on this?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think that'd be neat, really neat to explore. And I realized I didn't do a good job earlier. I mean, some of your or even earlier comments just about bringing your collective capacities around the benchmarks that you've set and how we track and quantify things in all contexts. It would be very welcome. So almost regardless of how it's constructed, I probably should have said earlier, like we would love to partner on taking advantage of the horsepower that you all have to make sure that whatever work is being done in your states that's feeding into this, that we're getting the best rigor and best data, best rigor, most precise tracking verification that we can. So just right off the top, I think that would be a great collaboration. It'd be a great shared goal that I think would be very exciting. And then, to a really innovative idea like that, I think could be super interesting and catalytic. And I think that's exactly the kind of thing it'd be really fun to bring into, for example, this carbon finance working group. And because we said the whole time, we want new ideas. Like we got the old ideas, we want new ones. That's a really, really interesting, cool one. And I think it'd be really fun to shape something like that and engage the right folks around it.
Well, good. Well, we'll talk about it and see if we can think of ways in which we could possibly collaborate on that, because I'm just looking at this, the trillion tree, big picture, goal that's out there in a voluntary market. That's great. It's amazing. But I would think the World Economic Forum and all those that have been involved with it, having some kind of, that equals something, in terms of carbon reduction, right? Or at least, protecting a lot of the existing forests and then bringing on new carbon sequestration. And that turns into whatever the number is in terms of carbon reduction. I'm sure you have some estimates on that, depending upon the species of trees that
exactly
planted and so on, right?
Yeah, no, that's one of the neat things. Having the U.S. Forest Service as a partner here is so amazing. We've been partnering with them now for actually about a year, so even a partnership that preceded this effort. on trying to refine the carbon and standardize, most importantly, standardize and then also refine the carbon calculations that we're doing for both, conserving forests as well as growing and restoring forests. And so, the data is there, the horsepower is there. It's just a matter of harnessing it. And so the Forest Service has been a really great partner. And if we say, that's good, but what about this? It's not good enough. We have access to a base of science and collaborators to kind of fill gaps or refine things. Bottom line, I think those pieces are critically important, and we do have the capacity to keep refining things until they're exactly where we want them to be.
That's great. Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Mark, I want to say I like your idea and certainly be interested in exploring it. The power of our region, of all the states, be considerable in making substantial commitments. But I unfortunately have to jump off, so I will say so long, and thank you, Jad.
Thank you, Dana, for your leadership and continuing to push this along and get us all together as well. So I thank you very much for that.
Sure, my pleasure.
Yes.
Thanks so much. This has been fun, and look forward to if you want to reconnect on the same topic with the broader group. I'm all game, and even happy to do the presentation again if it's better live. So you just tell me whatever you want, whatever you need. Dig around the website, come back with questions. Keep kicking the tires, press us. But anything. We really want to work with you, dig in with you on this, and again, grateful for the partnership, and look forward to exploring further some of these great ideas that came out today.
Great. Thank you so much, Jad. And we will definitely follow up, given the level of interest in all that you're doing. And thanks for sticking on this call for an extra half hour or so. This was a good discussion.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you.